History books often credit the Han Dynasty with opening the Silk Road. This is the story we all know, a tale of imperial envoys and official caravans forging a path to the west. But what if that famous road was not the beginning, but merely the moment the map was finally drawn? New discoveries are unraveling a far older mystery, revealing that the continents were already whispering to each other long before any emperor declared the route open. By the end of this exploration, you will see the map of the ancient world redrawn, connected by threads invisible to the history books. Who were the true architects of this first global network, and what forgotten treasures were they moving across the roof of the world? How much of what we call civilization was actually a gift from distant, unknown neighbors? That famous name, the Silk Road, paints a picture in our minds of a single, grand highway stretching across deserts and mountains. But this is where our modern imagination trips over the ancient reality. The Silk Road was never one road. It was a sprawling, ever-shifting web of pathways, a living network of trails, mountain passes, and river valleys connecting countless towns, oases, and caravanserais. More importantly, that poetic name itself is a relatively recent invention, coined by a German geographer in the late 19th century. The people who actually traveled these routes for centuries would never have used the term. They were simply moving goods to the next market, carrying news from the last town, following the trails their grandparents used. So if the name is modern and the concept is a network, not a single route, then what are we really looking for when we search for its origins? We are not searching for the first cobblestone laid by an emperor's decree. We are searching for the moment the network first sparked to life, for the earliest evidence of those core functions: long-distance trade, the exchange of ideas, the silent movement of technologies from one culture to another. These functions could not have simply appeared overnight with a Han Dynasty diplomatic mission. They are the result of slow, patient building over generations, even centuries. To find the true beginning, we must look for the quiet hum of activity that existed long before the official map was drawn. The traditional story begins with a crisis on the northern frontier. Around the year 130 before the Common Era, Emperor Wu of the Han Dynasty faced a powerful nomadic confederation known as the Xiongnu. In a bold strategic move, the emperor dispatched a court official named Zhang Qian on a dangerous mission westward. His goal was not trade but alliance, to find and secure partners who could help the Han confront this persistent threat. The journey was arduous. Zhang Qian was captured, held for years, and yet he persevered, eventually returning to the Han capital with something far more valuable than a military pact. He brought back detailed reports of sophisticated civilizations thriving in the Fergana Valley and beyond, describing powerful horses, unfamiliar crops, and vibrant commercial cities. This intelligence was a revelation. It prompted the Han court to actively cultivate these Western connections, leading to the formalized diplomatic missions and state-sponsored caravans that would later define the Silk Road in the history books. Zhang Qian's journey is rightly a pivotal moment, a brilliant flash of light that suddenly illuminated a whole section of the map for Chinese historians. But here is the crucial distinction. This is the moment the network entered the official record in vivid detail, not the moment the network was built. Think of it like turning on a lamp in a room you thought was empty, only to realize people have been quietly conversing there for hours. The light did not create the conversation, it simply revealed it. The historical record from this point forward becomes rich with names, goods, and routes, giving us the chronological anchor we are so familiar with. Yet the evidence we are about to explore suggests the whispers in that room were already centuries old. This leaves us with a profound historical puzzle. How do we find a network that history chose not to name? The challenge is one of evidence, a clash between what was written down and what was actually happening on the ground. For the centuries before the Han Dynasty's official missions, we possess almost no contemporary texts that describe a long-distance trade system. The written record from that era is largely silent on the matter, creating the illusion of isolated cultures. This silence, however, is not proof of absence. It is merely a gap in one type of evidence. To hear the whispers of that older network, we must learn to listen to a different kind of testimony, one written not in ink on bamboo or silk, but in the soil itself. This is where archaeology becomes our most powerful tool, our method for reading between the lines of history. Archaeologists act as detectives of the deep past, piecing together stories from fragments that texts never mention. A single artifact found far from its place of origin is a clue. The chemical residue of a foreign plant on an ancient cooking pot is another. The specific goods chosen to accompany individuals to their final resting place, goods that held profound meaning for the living, tell a story of what was valued, what was rare, and what connections made those items possible. These material clues provide silent, yet undeniable, testimony to movement and contact. They reveal a reality of exchange that was so routine, so embedded in the fabric of daily life and ceremonial practice, that no one at the time felt the need to formally document it as a grand system. It was simply how the world worked. So, as we move forward, we are not following the detailed maps left by scribes. We are following a trail of scattered stones, hidden fibers, and molecular ghosts, all pointing toward a connected world waiting to be remembered. The evidence for this prehistoric network begins with two silent stones. Deep in the tombs of the ancient Xiongnu culture, along China's eastern coast, archaeologists have uncovered exquisite artifacts carved from a specific type of nephrite jade. This was no ordinary stone. It held immense spiritual and social power, signifying authority and connection to the ancestors. Yet chemical analysis reveals a startling truth. The nearest source for this particular jade lay over 2,000 miles to the west, in the remote Hetian region of what is now Xinjiang. This means that over 5,000 years ago, during a time we label as Neolithic or New Stone Age, someone was undertaking an almost unimaginable journey. They were moving blocks of incredibly heavy stone across some of the most forbidding terrain on Earth, through towering mountain ranges and vast deserts, to deliver it to craftsmen on the opposite side of a continent. This was not a casual trip. It was a deliberate, organized effort implying established routes, trusted intermediaries, and a shared understanding of immense value that transcended local cultures. At the same time, in the opposite direction, another volcanic glass tells a parallel story. Obsidian, prized for its razor-sharp edges, was being traded from sources in Central Asia, like the distant Pamir Mountains, and found its way eastward. These two materials, jade flowing east and obsidian flowing west, create a silent cross-continental dialogue. They prove that high-value goods were moving over staggering distances millennia before the concept of China or empire even existed. This trade was not about bulk or daily necessities. It was about prestige, ritual, and power. The very fact that communities would go to such extraordinary lengths for these materials speaks to a deep, interconnected worldview that we are only beginning to comprehend. Who were the individuals who first learned the paths through those high mountain passes? What stories and technologies traveled alongside those silent stones? The network was already humming, its earliest threads woven not from silk but from the earth itself. These silent stones point us toward a landscape that shaped the entire story, a geography so immense it is almost impossible to visualize. To understand how jade could travel 2,000 miles, we must shift our gaze north, away from the deserts we associate with later silk caravans, and up onto the roof of the world itself. This is the Eurasian steppe, a seemingly endless belt of rolling grasslands that stretches unbroken from the edges of Eastern Europe all the way to the Mongolian plateau. For thousands of years, this was the original superhighway of the ancient world, but a highway with no pavement, no roadside markers, and no official rest stops. Its infrastructure was entirely natural, a continuous sea of grass that provided the one essential resource for long-distance movement, forage for animals. This was the domain of pastoralist communities, peoples whose entire way of life was built around mobility, following their herds of sheep, goats, cattle, and, most importantly, horses. Their existence was one of constant, seasonal movement across vast distances, a life that inherently created a deep, intuitive knowledge of the terrain, the weather patterns, and the locations of vital water sources. Unlike the later, more famous Silk Road routes that snaked through punishing deserts like the Taklamakan, dependent on a fragile chain of oasis towns, the steppe corridor offered a fundamentally different model. It was not a narrow line but a broad, open zone, a wide corridor where travelers could move freely across a front hundreds of miles wide. This geography did not funnel people into single-file caravans. It allowed for a diffuse, networked kind of movement. Communities did not need to build the road. The road was already there, growing from the earth itself. The later desert routes, for all their legendary danger and romance, were actually a technological adaptation, a specialized response for moving through an environment that was actively hostile to life. They required precise planning, fortified way stations, and carried the constant risk of running out of water. The steppe, in contrast, was inherently traversable for those who knew its rhythms. Goods, ideas, and people could flow along this grassy highway with a fluidity that was impossible in the mountains or deserts below. The movement was not yet the organized, state-sponsored commerce of empires. It was the organic, ceaseless motion of nomadic life, where every seasonal migration, every meeting at a traditional grazing ground, became an opportunity for exchange. So while history remembers the camels plodding past desert dunes, the first true long-distance travelers were likely on horseback, moving silently across an ocean of grass, carrying the future of global connection with them. But who were these first travelers moving silently across that sea of grass? They were not merchants in the classical sense, nor were they agents of any emperor. They were the people of the steppe itself, the diverse and highly mobile pastoralist cultures of the Bronze Age. Their names are often lost to us, later grouped by historians under broad terms like the Saka, the Scythians, or the Yuezhi. But these labels can obscure the vibrant tapestry of individual communities that formed the true nervous system of this ancient world. Their entire existence was a masterclass in long-distance logistics. Following the seasonal rhythms of their herds of sheep, goats, and horses, they traced migratory circuits that could span hundreds of miles year after year. This was not aimless wandering, it was a deliberate, cyclical journey across a known and cherished landscape. And with every movement, they carried more than just their families and animals. Their packed belongings contained the seeds of connection, trade goods from their last seasonal meeting, new tools acquired from a distant group, and stories heard around a shared fire. Their lifestyle was not a barrier to civilization, it was the very engine of its spread. Imagine each migratory group as a living, breathing node in a vast, decentralized network. When their paths crossed at traditional grazing grounds or near sacred springs, it was more than a social event. It was a continental swap meet, a summit of innovation. Here, a bronze-making technique developed in the Altai Mountains could be demonstrated to someone from the Mongolian plateau. A new style of horse bit, offering better control, could be exchanged for a finely woven textile from the south. A song, a myth, or a spiritual idea could begin its journey across languages. These pastoralists were the essential linchpins, the original long-haul couriers of ideas. To view them through the old lens of settled societies as mere barbarians on the fringe is to completely miss their monumental role. They were the integrators, the ones who made the distances between settled agricultural worlds seem smaller. They did not build walled cities, but they built something perhaps more enduring, the channels through which the materials, technologies, and thoughts of entire continents could slowly mingle and evolve. Their legacy is written in the quiet diffusion of things we now take for granted. So the next time you picture the ancient world, do not just see isolated dots of civilization on a map. See the spaces between them, alive with motion, and the people on horseback who turned those empty spaces into the first web of global exchange. Perhaps the most stunning proof of this deep, ancient connection is not a silent stone, but a thundering machine of war and prestige. The spoke-wheeled chariot, a revolutionary technology of the Bronze Age, offers a perfect case study in how complex ideas traveled these early networks. Its journey begins not in the great river valleys of early civilizations, but out on the open grasslands. Around 4,000 years ago, in the region of the southern Ural Mountains, a culture known today as Sintashta achieved something extraordinary. They were master metalworkers and horse breeders, and they combined these skills to create a new kind of vehicle, a lightweight, fast chariot with two spoked wheels, pulled by a pair of specially trained horses. This was not a heavy cart for hauling goods. It was a highly specialized instrument, likely used for ritual displays, hunting, and as a mobile platform for elite warriors in conflict. The Sintashta people did not just build chariots, they built an entire culture around them, burying chariots, horses, and their drivers together in elaborate memorials, a testament to the technology's profound social and spiritual significance. Now, here is where the network comes alive. This sophisticated technology, born on the western steppes, appears hundreds of years later, over 2,000 miles to the east, in the heart of the Shang Dynasty in China, around the year 1200 before the Common Era. The Shang chariots are remarkably similar in their core design, the same lightweight structure, the same spoked wheel technology, the same use of paired horses. This is not a coincidence of parallel invention. The evidence points clearly to transmission. But this transfer poses a fascinating puzzle. A chariot is not a simple trade good like a piece of jade. You cannot simply pack a fully assembled chariot on a camel and send it east. This was a transfer of a complete technological package, a bundle of interconnected knowledge. It required the understanding of selective horse breeding to produce animals strong enough yet agile enough to pull the vehicle. It required the advanced woodworking skills to craft the flexible, bentwood frames and the precisely fitted spoked wheels. It required the knowledge of metallurgy to produce the bronze fittings for the yoke and bridle. And perhaps most importantly, it required the knowledge of how to use it, the techniques for training both horses and drivers to function as a single, coordinated unit. This means that along those steppe corridors moving eastward over centuries, traveled not just objects but people, craftsmen, trainers, and specialists. They carried the blueprint in their minds and their hands. The appearance of the chariot in Shang China is therefore a silent record of a profound cultural exchange, a moment where a foreign technology was adopted and adapted, eventually becoming a central symbol of royal power in a new civilization. It stands as undeniable material proof that the steppe network was not just moving pretty stones, it was transmitting the very engines of social change, connecting continents through the shared language of innovation long before any official road was ever named. The chariot's journey was not the only profound movement of people. In the silent, arid sands of the Tarim Basin, in what is now Western China, the earth has preserved a mystery that speaks directly to these ancient connections. Here, archaeologists have uncovered a series of remarkably preserved individuals, often called the Tarim Basin mummies, dating from as early as 1800 before the Common Era. Their state of preservation is due to the dry desert climate, allowing us to see details of their lives with startling clarity. What is most striking, however, is their appearance. These individuals, buried in what seems like the heart of Asia, possess physical features typically associated with Western Eurasia, such as light hair and tall stature. They are dressed in sophisticated, brightly colored woolen garments, some even woven in complex twill and tartan patterns that feel eerily familiar to styles found thousands of miles to the west. These are not the remains of a passing caravan, but of a settled community that lived, farmed, and raised families in this oasis environment for centuries. Their very presence rewrites the map of the ancient world. It tells us that by at least 2,000 years before the Han Dynasty's envoys set out, people from far distant regions had not only traveled to this crucial crossroads, but had put down roots. They built communities at the very places that would later become the essential way stations on the desert branch of the Silk Road, the oases that made crossing the Taklamakan possible. These communities were not just passive waypoints, they were active, living nodes in the network. Their knowledge of local water sources, their weaving technologies, their very cultural traditions became part of the infrastructure of exchange. They were likely among the first to greet travelers coming down from the steppe highways, offering rest, trade, and a transfer of knowledge. The mummies are a biological and cultural snapshot, proving that the crossroads of continents were already populated by a tapestry of peoples long before history chose to record their names. They stand as silent, enduring witnesses to a world already deeply intertwined, where the movement of people was as fundamental as the movement of goods. Silk may define the road in our imaginations, but it was not the engine that first set it in motion. Long before bolts of shimmering fabric became the ultimate luxury good, the trade that pulsed along those ancient pathways was built on something far more fundamental: the raw materials of power and survival. Two commodities in particular formed the bedrock of this pre-Han exchange: metals and horses. To understand their value is to understand what early civilizations truly needed to build and defend themselves. The story of Chinese bronze, that magnificent alloy that defined the Shang and Zhou dynasties, has a hidden ingredient with a distant origin. While copper deposits were available locally, the tin required to harden it into true bronze was exceedingly rare in early China. Where did it come from? Archaeologists and historians point to sources far to the west, in the mountains of Central Asia, in regions like modern-day Uzbekistan and Tajikistan. This means that the very essence of Chinese ritual vessels, weapons, and symbols of authority was dependent on a supply chain that stretched thousands of miles across the steppe. Tin, a relatively lightweight but vitally important metal, became a prime trade good, moving east in caravans organized by those same pastoralist middlemen who knew the routes. Along with the raw material came the artisans. Stunning goldwork discovered in elite tombs from the late first millennium before the Common Era shows techniques, like intricate granulation and filigree, that are strikingly similar to styles perfected by steppe cultures like the Scythians. This was not merely imported treasure, it was imported knowledge. The movement of metal was a two-way street of material and mastery, proving that the network dealt in the very tools of civilization itself. Yet, if metals built the instruments of power, it was the horse that provided the means to wield it. The relationship between Chinese states and the nomadic peoples of the north was forever defined by the equine trade. From very early times, the settled agricultural societies needed horses, and lots of them, for cavalry, for chariots, and for prestige. The herds bred on the northern steppes were superior in both stamina and strength to anything bred in the heartland. But the ultimate object of desire, the legendary heavenly horses, were said to come from even further west, from the lush Fergana Valley. Historical texts describe these animals as sweating blood, a likely reference to a parasitic condition, but more importantly, they were described as supernatural creatures, capable of carrying riders hundreds of miles to meet the stars. The Han Dynasty's later wars to secure these Fergana horses are well documented, but the desire for them and the trade in quality stock undoubtedly predates those campaigns by centuries. A superior horse was not just a military asset, it was a strategic one capable of transforming a kingdom's reach and influence. The constant negotiation, conflict, and exchange over horses formed a relentless heartbeat along the frontier, a driving force for contact that made the later trade in silks and spices possible. This was a trade born of necessity and ambition, where the quest for the perfect steed quietly shaped diplomacy, warfare, and the very geography of connection for generations before any emperor decided to formalize the route. Among these countless nomadic groups moving across the steppe, one confederation rose to such prominence that their name was carefully recorded by later Chinese historians, the Yuezhi. For centuries before the Han Dynasty's expansion, they were the masters of a crucial geographical choke point known as the Hexi Corridor, a narrow strip of fertile land nestled between mountains and desert that formed the only practical gateway from the Chinese heartland to the vast open steppe beyond. This position made them the ultimate middlemen, the indispensable brokers in the ancient world's most important trades. Chinese sources describe them as wealthy and powerful, dealing in the two commodities we just discussed, the heavenly horses from the west and the precious jade from the Hetian deposits to their northwest. They controlled the flow, setting prices, managing logistics, and building a pastoral empire on the profits of connection. Their very existence formalized the earlier, organic networks, creating a more structured and reliable channel between the settled world of farmers and the mobile world of the steppe. For the early Chinese states, dealing with the Yuezhi was not a choice. It was a necessity if they wanted access to the goods and technologies of the wider world. This relationship was the prototype for all the diplomatic and economic exchanges that would follow. Yet, the very power that made the Yuezhi pivotal also made them a target. In the mid-2nd century before the Common Era, a new and aggressive nomadic force coalesced on the northern frontiers, the Xiongnu Confederation. Around the year 175 before the Common Era, the Xiongnu launched a devastating campaign against their rivals. The Yuezhi were decisively defeated, their king was lost, and the survivors were violently driven from their homeland in the Hexi Corridor, forced to flee westward in a great migration that would eventually reshape Central Asia. This was not merely a border skirmish, it was a geopolitical earthquake. The collapse of the Yuezhi monopoly shattered the established trade system and left a powerful, hostile Xiongnu Confederation directly on the Han Dynasty's doorstep. The sudden vacuum of power and the urgent need for new allies against this common enemy created the precise crisis that prompted Emperor Wu to dispatch Zhang Qian on his famous mission westward. His primary goal, as history tells us, was to find the scattered Yuezhi and persuade them to return and fight the Xiongnu. So the journey we credit with opening the Silk Road was in fact a desperate diplomatic response to the fall of the very network that had been operating for centuries. The official history begins with a search for the ghosts of the middlemen who made it all possible. Zhang Qian's mission was a search for allies in the wake of a shattered network, but this story of connection was never just an Eastern phenomenon. While pastoralists moved goods across the Asian steppe and the Yuezhi brokered jade and horses, another empire on the opposite side of the continent was perfecting the art of long-distance control. In the 5th century before the Common Era, the Achaemenid Persian Empire, stretching from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea, constructed one of the most sophisticated logistical systems the ancient world had ever seen, the Royal Road. This was not a vague network of trails, but a meticulously engineered and managed highway, running over 1,600 miles from the imperial capital of Susa in modern-day Iran, all the way to the wealthy city of Sardis on the coast of Anatolia, what is now Turkey. The Persian kings did not merely clear a path, they built an infrastructure of power. They established a chain of 111 official posting stations at regular intervals along the route. At each station, fresh horses, supplies, and royal couriers waited, ready to relay messages and authorize travelers with breathtaking speed. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing about this system, marveled that neither snow, nor rain, nor heat, nor gloom of night could slow these couriers down. This was the ancient equivalent of a high-speed information network, allowing the Persian court to administer its vast territories with remarkable efficiency. But the road was far more than a postal service. It was also a protected commercial artery. Standardized security, known waypoints, and reliable access to water and shelter lowered the risk for merchants, encouraging a steady flow of taxes and luxury goods back to the imperial center. The Royal Road stands as undeniable proof that the organizational capacity for continent-spanning routes, complete with dedicated support systems and a clear administrative purpose, was fully developed in the Western world centuries before the Han Dynasty's envoys set out. It shows us that the dream of connecting distant lands was not unique to one culture or one part of the world, but a recurring ambition of rising empires. While the Eastern networks were more organic, woven together by countless independent actors, the Persian model was a top-down masterpiece of imperial engineering. Yet both systems, in their own ways, served the same ultimate function. They shrunk the world, making the faraway seem attainable and the foreign seem familiar. This parallel development begs a profound question. If both East and West were building these grand corridors of exchange independently, what might happen if their separate webs of connection ever managed to touch? The Persian Royal Road demonstrated what an empire could achieve with a single, unified vision. But the next great catalyst for connection would arrive not through careful administration, but through the relentless march of conquest. In the year 329 before the Common Era, the armies of Alexander the Great pushed into the heart of Central Asia, reaching the distant river valleys of Sogdiana and Bactria, lands that were already ancient hubs in the steppe network. Alexander's campaign was a seismic event, a violent collision of worlds that shattered old political boundaries and forcibly stitched the Mediterranean sphere directly onto the eastern web of trade. His soldiers did not just bring swords and shields, they brought an entire cultural package, from language and artistic styles to urban planning, and a new economic system based on Greek coinage. When Alexander's vast empire fragmented after his passing, it did not revert to isolation. Instead, it gave birth to a series of remarkable Hellenistic kingdoms right on Asia's doorstep, the most famous being the Greco-Bactrian kingdom. For over a century, this was a thriving, wealthy state where Greek and local cultures fused in fascinating ways. Greek became a language of administration and commerce. Skilled artisans produced stunning works that blended classical Greek realism with local themes, creating statues of Buddha that wore Greek-style robes, or coins that bore the image of a Greek king on one side and local symbols on the other. This was not a superficial overlay, it was a deep cultural synthesis. The Greco-Bactrians, and later their neighbors like the Indo-Greeks, became powerful new nodes in the existing network. They minted vast quantities of high-quality, standardized silver coins, a currency that was trusted from the Mediterranean to the Indus Valley. This monetization supercharged trade, providing a reliable medium of exchange that made transactions easier and safer over long distances. Furthermore, these kingdoms, now positioned at the crossroads, developed a powerful taste for the luxuries of the East. Their elites created a sustained demand for Chinese silks, Central Asian jade, and Indian spices, pulling these goods further westward than ever before. In return, they injected Greek artistic motifs, architectural ideas, and stories into the circulatory system of Asia. A traveler moving along the steppe routes in the 2nd century before the Common Era might encounter a vibrant trading city where the temples had Corinthian columns. The local ruler issued coins with his portrait in a Greek helmet, and the merchants argued over prices using Greek weights and measures, all while trading for bolts of silk that had come from a civilization thousands of miles. The East, Alexander's conquests, therefore, did not create the Silk Road. What they did was something equally transformative. They hardwired the western terminus of the existing network directly into the economic and cultural engine of the Hellenistic world. The whispers between continents now had a powerful, eloquent new voice. The frozen earth of Siberia holds a library of this ancient world, written not in scrolls but in ice. Across the vast expanse of the Eurasian steppe, from the Black Sea to the Altai Mountains, great earthen mounds known as kurgans rise from the grasslands. These are not random hills but deliberate memorials, the final resting places of the pastoral elite. And in the highest, coldest reaches, something extraordinary happened. Water seeped into the burial chambers and froze, creating a natural time capsule that preserved organic materials for over 2,000 years. The most famous of these are the Pazyryk burials in the Altai Mountains, dating from the 5th to the 3rd centuries before the Common Era. When archaeologists carefully excavated these tombs, they did not just find bones and metal, they found a perfectly preserved snapshot of a connected continent. Here, in the heart of the steppe, far from any settled empire, they uncovered the mummified remains of a tribal leader, his skin covered in intricate tattoos of mythical animals. Beside him lay his horses, sacrificed for his journey, still wearing their elaborate felt saddles and bridles decorated with gold and carved wood. But the true revelation was in the textiles. Within these tombs, they found the oldest known surviving pile carpet in the world, a masterpiece of weaving with rich, colorful patterns. They found felt wall hangings depicting ceremonial scenes. And most tellingly, they found silks, not just any silks, but Chinese silks, woven with patterns that clearly originated in the Warring States period of China, over 1,000 miles to the southeast. Alongside these were lacquerware from Chinese workshops and even a bronze mirror from the same region. Yet the assemblage was not purely Eastern. The artistic styles of the tattoos and carvings show clear influences from Persian and even Greek sources, evidence of that westward cultural pull from the Hellenistic world. A single kurgan, like the magnificent Arjun burial in Tuva, acts as a museum of the ancient network. The individual interred there was laid to rest with over 5,000 gold objects, alongside treasures that spoke of every direction: Chinese silks, Persian textiles, and ornaments that echoed styles from India. This is the material proof of everything the earlier whispers suggested. These were not isolated nomads, but cosmopolitan elites whose wealth and identity were built upon their position at the center of a web. The goods buried with them were not merely decorative, they were statements of power, tangible proof of their access to the most exclusive and distant markets on Earth. They wore the world as their ornament. The frozen tombs tell us that by at least the 5th century before the Common Era, centuries before Zhang Qian's journey, the steppe aristocracy was already curating a pan-continental lifestyle. They selected the finest silks from the east, the most intricate metals from the west, and the most potent symbols from all points between, weaving them into a single, powerful identity. This was a world already in conversation with itself, its dialogue preserved in ice, waiting for us to listen. While the frozen kurgans of the steppe held treasures from the east, the tombs of ancient China were quietly collecting wonders from the west. If goods were flowing out, they were also flowing in, and the evidence is etched in bronze and gold within the very heartland of early Chinese states. Take, for instance, the fascinating kingdom of Zhongshan. This was a small but significant state during the tumultuous late Zhou dynasty, centuries before China's first unification under the Qin. When archaeologists excavated the tombs of Zhongshan's aristocracy, they expected to find the classic ritual bronzes, jade by discs, and lacquerware typical of Chinese elite burial practice. And they did, but nestled among these traditional symbols of power and piety were objects that did not belong, artifacts that whispered of distant horizons. Among the most striking were ornate bronze belt plaques and harness ornaments, but their style was utterly foreign. Instead of the intricate, abstract patterns or touty masks common in Zhou art, these pieces were alive with dynamic animal combat scenes. They depicted stags, tigers, and griffins locked in swirling, energetic struggles, a style art historians immediately recognize as the so-called animal style of the Eurasian steppes. This was not a case of vague inspiration. It was a direct import, either in the object itself or in the very hands of the artisan who made it. The presence of these items in a Zhongshan royal tomb is profoundly revealing. It tells us that by at least the 4th or 3rd century before the Common Era, the elite in this corner of China were consciously curating a cosmopolitan identity. Possessing and being buried with these exotic items was a statement. It signaled wealth, of course, but also worldly connections and a sophisticated awareness of cultures far beyond their own borders. This was not trade driven by basic necessity. It was trade driven by desire, by the powerful human urge to acquire the rare, the beautiful, and the symbolically potent from the farthest reaches of the known world. The Zhongshan nobles were not just local rulers, they were participants in a continental conversation, using artifacts from the steppe to enhance their own prestige in death, just as their steppe counterparts used Chinese silk. This two-way flow of artistic language proves the network was a true dialogue. Motifs and techniques were not simply leaking out of China, they were circulating, being adopted, adapted, and sent back in new forms. A steppe artisan might reimagine a Chinese dragon motif into a more fluid, predatory creature, and that new design could then travel back east, finding favor in a workshop serving a Chinese noble who prized its foreign flair. This cultural cross-pollination was already sophisticated and deeply embedded in elite society, long before a single Han emperor decided to send an envoy west. The borders, in a cultural sense, were already porous. The real walls were not yet built, and the world was already exchanging its artistic vocabulary, one precious object at a time. The artistic language of the steppe had a name, and its most fluent speakers were the Scythians. From the 7th to the 3rd centuries before the Common Era, this confederation of tribes dominated the western half of the Eurasian steppe, controlling a staggering territory that stretched from the northern shores of the Black Sea all the way to the foothills of the Altai Mountains. They were not a centralized empire with a single capital, but a vast, interconnected network of powerful clans, united by a shared way of life and a spectacular visual culture. Their position made them the ultimate conduit, the critical link between the settled civilizations of the Mediterranean, Persia, and the Greek world to their south and west, and the endless nomadic east. Any idea, any artifact, any technology moving between these worlds would almost certainly pass through Scythian hands, be carried on Scythian horses, and be filtered through Scythian sensibilities. They were the gatekeepers of the western grasslands, and they stamped everything they touched with a signature style. That signature is what we call the Scythian animal style. It is an art in motion born from a life spent on horseback, observing the natural world with a hunter's intense focus. Forget static portraits or serene landscapes. This art is all about tension, energy, and the raw drama of survival. It depicts creatures locked in eternal, swirling combat, stags with impossibly elongated antlers curling into abstract patterns, eagles clutching prey, and mythical griffins with predatory beaks. The animals are often contorted, their bodies bent into perfect dynamic arcs to fit the shape of the object they decorate, whether it is a gold plaque for a jacket, the handle of a dagger, or the finial of a ceremonial pole. This was not art for a gallery, it was art for life and for the journey beyond. It adorned everything from everyday tools to the most lavish treasures buried with their elite, serving as a spiritual armor and a declaration of identity. And this is where we see the network in its most vibrant form. The influence of this distinctive animal style did not stay confined to the Scythian heartland. Its echoes ripple across the map of Eurasia. You can find its unmistakable imprint on bronze work in the Ordos region, north of early China. You see its motifs reflected in the plaques of the Zhongshan kingdom we discussed. You can even detect its spirit in the metalwork of cultures deep in the Caucasus Mountains. This widespread distribution is not a coincidence of parallel thought. It is the material evidence of transmission, a visual language that traveled along the very trade and contact routes the Scythians mastered. A goldsmith in a Greek colony on the Black Sea might produce a piece for a Scythian chieftain, blending Greek technique with Scythian taste. That chieftain, in turn, might gift that object during an alliance ceremony with a clan from the east, carrying the style further along the network. The art itself became a trade good, and more importantly, a carrier of aesthetic ideas. The consistent appearance of these motifs across thousands of miles tells us that shared values, stories, and a common artistic vocabulary were flowing along the steppe highway with the same reliability as jade or silk. The Scythians did not just move goods, they moved an entire visual culture, proving that these early routes carried the soul of the continent, not just its wealth. The most portable cargo of all traveled not in saddlebags but in the human mind. While jade, silk, and gold formed the tangible skeleton of these ancient routes, the true lifeblood of the network was something far less visible: the silent exchange of ideas, stories, and spiritual beliefs. A merchant did not simply carry bolts of cloth or ingots of metal. He carried the myths of his homeland, the symbols of his faith, and the artistic tastes of his culture. These intangible goods were the hidden passengers on every journey, and their footprints are etched into the artifacts they left behind. Consider a single, powerful symbol, the Faravahar. This ancient Persian motif, depicting a winged figure within a circle, was a sacred emblem of Zoroastrianism, representing divine grace and the human soul. It originated in the heart of the Achaemenid Empire, yet centuries later, this very same symbol appears, carved into rock faces and artifacts thousands of miles to the east, along the trade routes of Central Asia and even into northwestern India. There was no Persian army conquering those distant valleys at that time, no imperial decree mandating its use. Its journey was a quiet one, carried by Zoroastrian traders, artisans, or migrants who traveled those routes, planting their spiritual iconography in new soil where it could take root and be reinterpreted by local cultures. This is the diffusion of faith, moving at the speed of a walking caravan. The same phenomenon unfolds with the vibrant tapestry of Greek mythology. After Alexander's conquests, the stories of Hercules, Dionysus, and Zeus did not remain confined to the Mediterranean. They rode east on the currents of Hellenistic culture. In the trading cities of Bactria, archaeologists have uncovered stunning artifacts like a gold belt buckle depicting the Greek goddess of victory, Nike. More remarkably, in the later Buddhist art of Gandhara, a region in modern-day Pakistan and Afghanistan, we see the figure of the Buddha rendered with the calm, idealized features and draped toga-like robes of a Greek god. The Greek hero Hercules was transformed into Vajrapani, a protective deity who stands beside the Buddha. These are not random artistic choices, they are the result of a profound cultural conversation. Greek colonists and traders brought their visual language with them, and local Buddhist artists, seeking to communicate their own spiritual truths to a diverse, cosmopolitan population, adopted and adapted these powerful foreign forms. The image of the Buddha as we commonly recognize it today, with its graceful, humanistic proportions, may owe a direct debt to this artistic fusion along the trade routes. A spiritual idea from India found its most compelling expression through an artistic vocabulary borrowed from Greece, all because their worlds had been connected by the relentless engine of exchange. This movement of beliefs was a two-way street, flowing east just as powerfully as it flowed west. While Greek gods found new roles in Buddhist art, Central Asian and even Chinese spiritual concepts began to seep westward. The mystery cults of the Roman Empire, for instance, showed a growing fascination with Eastern ideas of salvation and rebirth. The profound question of what happens after our time here, a concern at the heart of so many belief systems, became a topic of shared exploration along these routes. Traders sitting around a fire at a caravanserai would not have only bargained over prices, they would have shared stories of their gods, their creation myths, and their views on the journey of the soul. A Persian merchant might explain the Zoroastrian struggle between light and darkness to a Scythian horseman, who might then share a tale of his own sky god with a Chinese silk trader. These conversations were the original interfaith dialogues, happening not in formal councils, but in the dusty courtyards of way stations under vast, starry skies. The routes carried more than spices and textiles. They carried the very frameworks through which people understood the universe and their place within it. A symbol carved onto a seal, a myth woven into a tapestry, a ritual observed at a roadside shrine. These were the seeds from which new syncretic beliefs could grow, blending traditions into something entirely new. The network, therefore, was not just an economic system. It was a circulatory system for the human spirit, proving that the deepest connections between cultures are forged not by treaties, but by the shared stories we choose to carry with us. The most vital cargo on these ancient routes required no pack animal at all. While gold and silk transformed the lives of the elite, a quieter, more profound exchange was taking root in the very soil beneath people's feet, an exchange that would reshape diets, economies, and the course of civilizations themselves. This was the slow, patient movement of agricultural knowledge, the transfer of seeds, fruits, and grains across the roof of the world. Unlike a bolt of silk that could be carried in a single journey, this was a migration measured in generations. It was not merely about transporting a handful of seeds, it was about transporting an entire ecosystem of knowledge, the understanding of when to plant, how to irrigate, and which rituals would ensure a good harvest in a completely new environment. From the east, the humble grain of millet began its long journey westward. A staple of early Chinese agriculture, millet was drought-resistant and could thrive in the poorer soils of the northern Loess highlands. Its cultivation was a cornerstone of communities for millennia. But then, around the second millennium before the Common Era, something remarkable appears in the archaeological record of Central Asia and even further into Europe, the chemical signature and preserved remains of foxtail and broomcorn millet. This was not a natural spread by wind or birds, the distances were too vast. This was human-mediated transfer. Pastoralist groups moving along their seasonal circuits likely carried small quantities of this fast-growing, reliable grain as a portable food source. Where they stopped, where they traded, some seeds were inevitably dropped or exchanged. Over centuries, this resilient grain was adopted by communities far from its homeland, adding a new, hardy crop to their agricultural repertoire and providing a crucial buffer against famine. The flow moved powerfully in the opposite direction as well. From the fertile crescent of Southwest Asia, a package of revolutionary crops began their eastward trek. Wheat and barley, which had fueled the rise of Mesopotamian cities, gradually made their way along the mountain valleys and oasis towns. Grapes, destined for wine and fruit, and alfalfa, a phenomenal fodder crop for animals, traveled with them. The arrival of wheat and barley in China, likely by at least the 3rd or 2nd millennium before the Common Era, was a quiet agricultural revolution. These Western cereals offered higher yields than millet in certain soils and could be grown in different seasons, allowing for more complex crop rotation and supporting larger, more concentrated populations. Their adoption was not immediate or wholesale. It was a slow process of experimentation and adaptation, as farmers learned how to cultivate these foreign plants in the distinct rhythms of the East Asian climate. How do we trace this silent biological exchange? The evidence often lies in the smallest of clues. Archaeologists sift through ancient soil and the remains of cooking pots, looking for phytoliths, microscopic silica structures that form in plant cells and survive long after the plant itself has decayed. They find carbonized seeds in ancient storage pits and hearths. This botanical evidence is irrefutable. It proves sustained, repeated contact because the transfer of a viable crop requires more than a one-time gift. It requires the sharing of deep, practical knowledge across language and cultural barriers. Someone had to explain that wheat needed to be sown in the autumn, not the spring. Someone had to demonstrate how to grind these harder grains into flour. This was knowledge transfer at the most fundamental level, affecting the basic subsistence and survival of entire communities. The food on a family's plate in an oasis town in the Tarim Basin, or later in the heartland of China itself, became a living testament to connections forged thousands of miles away and hundreds of years prior. The network was not just trading luxuries, it was quietly redistributing the very building blocks of life, one seed at a time. This consolidation of power on the steppe created a single, formidable entity where once there had been many. The Xiongnu Confederation, rising in the 3rd and 2nd centuries before the Common Era, became the dominant political reality of Inner Asia. For too long, history has painted them as a simple scourge, a barbarian horde whose only role was to raid the settled frontiers of China. This view misses their profound complexity and, ironically, their crucial role in accelerating the very connections they are said to have threatened. The Xiongnu were not mindless raiders, they were state builders of the steppe. Under charismatic leaders like Modu Chanyu, they unified the disparate nomadic tribes through a combination of martial prowess, shrewd diplomacy, and a shared system of loyalty and tribute. They created a vast, mobile empire with a centralized hierarchy, a defined legal code, and a sophisticated economy that expertly managed the very trade routes they now controlled. Their power rested on their ability to command the flow of goods and people across the northern grasslands. By bringing the chaotic network of pastoralist clans under one banner, they did not destroy the ancient web of exchange, they militarized and monopolized it. Suddenly, the previously diffuse and organic movement of goods had to contend with a single, powerful gatekeeper whose favor could mean prosperity and whose wrath could mean isolation. This new reality created immense pressure on both ends of the known world. To the west, they shattered the Yuezhi, the established middlemen, scattering them from their homeland and creating a power vacuum and a refugee crisis that would ripple across Central Asia. To the south, along the Great Wall frontier, they presented the Han Dynasty with an existential challenge. The Han could no longer rely on a buffer of smaller tribes or negotiate with multiple partners. They faced a single, organized rival whose cavalry could strike with devastating speed and whose economy was fed by the tribute and trade they extracted from the Silk Road's northern branch. The Han's initial strategy of appeasement, sending lavish gifts and royal brides in a practice called Hetian, was essentially paying a massive protection fee to this steppe superpower. It was a humiliating and costly arrangement that underscored a simple, brutal truth. The Xiongnu held the keys to the northern routes. This untenable situation became the primary catalyst for the Han's westward pivot. Emperor Wu's decision to send Zhang Qian was, at its core, a grand strategic maneuver to outflank the Xiongnu. If the Han could not break the Confederation's hold on the northern steppe, they would seek to open a new southern corridor through the Hexi corridor and beyond, and find powerful allies in the displaced Yuezhi to squeeze the Xiongnu from two sides. So, the famed diplomatic mission we celebrate as the opening of the Silk Road was in fact a direct response to Xiongnu aggression. Their empire, by consolidating the network and presenting a unified threat, forced the Han Dynasty to engage with the wider world in a sustained, official capacity. The Han did not create the network from nothing. They were compelled to join it, formalize it, and attempt to redirect its flow for their own survival. In a profound historical irony, the Xiongnu, often remembered as the great disruptors, may have been the ultimate unifiers, their pressure transforming regional trade into a matter of imperial geopolitics and setting the stage for the officially recorded Silk Road era. The Xiongnu's power forced empires to engage, but for centuries before them, the network thrived without any single ruler's command. This raises a fascinating puzzle. How did long-distance trade function across such vast, politically fragmented spaces? If there was no ancient equivalent of an international trade treaty or a centralized police force patrolling the steppe, what prevented chaos from consuming the caravans? The answer lies not in imperial decrees, but in a sophisticated, decentralized infrastructure built on something far more resilient: trust. This trust was not blind faith. It was a carefully engineered system of social and economic practices woven into the fabric of life along the routes. The first and most crucial mechanism was relay trade. No single merchant or group was expected to traverse the entire distance from the Yellow River to the Mediterranean. Instead, goods moved in stages, passed like a baton in a relay race from one trusted community to the next. A merchant from the Hexi corridor might travel 10 days west to a known oasis town, where he would trade his silks for jade with a local dealer. That dealer would then wait for a caravan coming from the Pamir Mountains, trading that silk further west for lapis lazuli. The original merchant never saw the final destination of his silk, and the end buyer never met its original source. This system minimized risk, as each participant only needed deep knowledge of their own regional stretch of the route, its dangers, its water sources, and its people. It also created a chain of mutual dependency, where the prosperity of each community relied on the safe passage of goods through the hands of their neighbors. This is where the oasis towns transformed from simple watering holes into something much more vital. They became neutral ports of trade. These towns, like those once inhabited by the Tarim Basin communities, developed a special status. They were often politically autonomous or served as agreed-upon meeting grounds between different nomadic confederations and settled powers. Within their walls, a different set of rules applied. Violence was taboo, disputes were settled by local elders, and standardized weights and measures were used. They were the ancient world's free ports where a Scythian horseman, a Persian merchant, and a Yuezhi broker could meet, exchange goods using a blend of barter and proto-currency like silver ingots, and part ways without fear of immediate ambush once they left. The safety of the port guaranteed the flow of goods into and out of it, but trust between strangers also required a shared social language. This was forged through ritualized gift exchange between elites. When a tribal chieftain received an envoy from a distant realm, they did not simply haggle over prices. They engaged in elaborate ceremonies, exchanging magnificent presents: a fine steel sword for a bolt of embroidered silk, a trained falcon for a jade cup. These were not commercial transactions in the modern sense. They were political acts establishing bonds of friendship and mutual obligation. The gifts created a relationship, and within that relationship, future trade could flow smoothly and predictably. To refuse a gift or to betray this hospitality was a profound dishonor with social and spiritual consequences. This practice elevated trade from mere commerce to a cornerstone of diplomacy, embedding economic motives within a framework of ritual and honor. Underpinning all of this was a set of shared cultural norms that transcended ethnic and linguistic differences across the steppe. A code of hospitality was sacred, requiring that any traveler be given food, shelter, and protection for a set number of days. There were likely common understandings regarding safe passage, the handling of disputes, and respect for religious sites along the way. The widespread adoption of the animal-style art, as we saw, is more than an aesthetic trend. It signals a shared symbolic language, a set of values about nature, power, and the spirit world that created a layer of common identity among diverse peoples. When a trader saw a certain style of belt plaque or felt rug pattern, it signaled not just wealth but a shared participation in this interconnected world. The system was fragile and could break down, as the Xiongnu rise demonstrated, but for long periods it functioned with remarkable efficiency. It was a world where a man's word and his adherence to unwritten codes were more valuable than any armed escort. The real infrastructure was not made of stone, but of countless handshake agreements, ritual feasts, and the silent understanding that everyone was better off when the goods kept moving. The silent trust of the steppe needed a voice everyone could understand. As the volume and complexity of trade grew, the ancient system of barter and ritual gift exchange began to strain. How could you quickly assess the value of a sack of grain against a bolt of silk, or a block of jade against a trained horse? The solution emerged not from a single empire's decree, but from a practical, grassroots innovation in the language of value itself. Long before the clink of standardized coins, communities were already experimenting with portable, symbolic forms of wealth. In China, during the Zhou dynasty's later centuries, this took a beautifully literal form. Instead of abstract coins, some of the earliest proto-currency was shaped like the tools it economically replaced: miniature bronze knives and spade blades. These were not functional tools, they were tokens, their size and weight carefully regulated to represent accepted value. Their discovery tells a powerful story of connection, for these distinctive Chinese knife and spade monies have been found far beyond the Great Wall, scattered across burial sites and settlements in the steppe regions of modern-day Mongolia and southern Siberia. A Chinese-shaped token of value, resting in a nomadic chieftain's memorial site, is a clear material signal. It shows that these steppe communities were not just passive recipients of finished goods, they were active participants in a burgeoning economic sphere that stretched into the Chinese heartland. They understood and accepted this foreign system of symbolic value, using these tokens likely in high-status exchanges or as stores of wealth themselves. This was commerce developing a shared grammar, but the true revolution in this financial language came from the West, carried on the winds of empire and imitation. The sprawling Achaemenid Persian Empire had perfected the use of standardized gold and silver coins, the darik and the siglos, stamped with the image of the king as a guarantee of purity and weight. To the west, the Greek city-states and later the Hellenistic kingdoms turned coinage into an art form, a portable canvas for gods, goddesses, and royal portraits. When these coins entered the circulatory system of Central Asia, they did more than buy goods. They introduced a transformative idea that value could be reliably encapsulated in a small, state-guaranteed piece of metal. The local kingdoms and tribal confederations along the trade routes saw the immense utility of this system and embarked on a fascinating period of creative imitation. In Bactria and Sogdiana, in the centuries just before Han expansion, local rulers began minting their own coins, but they did not start from scratch. They directly copied the most trusted templates available. Archaeologists find coins minted in Central Asia that are near-perfect replicas of Athenian owls or the portraits of Alexander the Great. Yet, upon closer inspection, the Greek letters in the inscriptions often become garbled or nonsensical. The portraits subtly shift to reflect local features or artistic styles. This was not counterfeiting in a criminal sense, it was a declaration of economic intent. These polities were leveraging the immense trust and recognition of Greek and Persian coinage to bootstrap their own economies into the wider network. By producing coins that looked familiar to traders from thousands of miles away, they lowered the barrier to transaction. A merchant from Mesopotamia could see a coin with Alexander's face, recognize its general weight and metal content, and accept it in payment, even if it was minted by a king he had never met in a city he had never visited. The widespread imitation signals a critical tipping point. The organic, trust-based trade of the earlier steppe was now formalizing, grappling with the needs of higher volume and more anonymous exchanges. The very act of minting coins required a degree of political centralization and economic foresight. It meant a local ruler was asserting control over a marketplace, guaranteeing value, and seeking to capture the profits of being a commercial hub. This financial innovation created a seamless transactional layer across the ancient world. A trader could set out from the Mediterranean with a purse of Greek tetradrachms, use them to buy lapis lazuli in Bactria, receive a mix of local imitative coins and silver ingots as change, and continue eastward, his wealth remaining liquid and recognizable. By the time Zhang Qian's mission traveled west in the 2nd century before the Common Era, this monetary ecosystem was already mature. The Han envoy would have encountered not just a bewildering array of goods, but a sophisticated financial landscape where the coins of forgotten Greek kings circulated alongside Persian drachms and Chinese silk served as a high-value commodity money. The stage for grand, state-sponsored commerce was not empty. It was already buzzing with the sound of countless transactions, a financial hum that had been building for centuries. The true architects of this ancient network were not just people and horses, but the very climate itself. The flow of goods and ideas across Asia was not a steady current. It pulsed and shifted with the rhythms of the earth, dictated by something as simple and profound as water. The routes we see on modern maps, those bold lines crossing deserts, were not permanent highways but fleeting possibilities, opened and closed by centuries-long shifts in rainfall and temperature. This was especially true in the most challenging environment of all, the Taklamakan Desert. This vast basin, ringed by towering mountain ranges, is one of the driest places on Earth, a true sea of sand where survival is measured in sips of water. Crossing it was only possible by stringing together a fragile chain of oasis towns, settlements that clung to life where meltwater from distant glaciers seeped to the surface. The locations of these oases were not random, they were gifts of ancient geology and climate. When rainfall was slightly more reliable or glacial melt was abundant, smaller springs might flourish, allowing new communities to form and creating alternative paths across the dunes. But when the climate turned drier, as it did in cycles over the millennia, those smaller springs would vanish, the life-giving water retreated, and with it, the towns that depended on them were abandoned, leaving only whispers in the sand for archaeologists to find centuries later. The entire network through the desert was in a constant, slow-motion dance with the environment, its pathways expanding and contracting like the branches of a tree seeking sunlight. This is why the communities like those of the Tarim Basin mummies were so resilient. They were masters of adaptation. They did not simply wait for the climate to change, they learned to read its subtle signs. They developed sophisticated irrigation systems to channel every drop of precious meltwater from the mountains into their fields. They cultivated crops that could tolerate saline soil, and they built their economies on flexibility, combining small-scale farming with animal herding and, crucially, servicing the travelers who braved the desert. Their survival depended on being a reliable node, a known source of water, food, and rest in an otherwise merciless landscape. When a route shifted because a distant spring failed, these communities had to be prepared to either adapt their own trade relationships or face being bypassed entirely. The movement of goods was therefore a direct reflection of ecological reality. a period of reliable moisture might see a surge in traffic along a southern track, bringing prosperity to a string of oasis towns. A century later, a prolonged drought could render that same track impassable, forcing caravans to seek a longer but better watered northern path around the desert's edge. This ebb and flow meant that no single route was ever the sole Silk Road. Instead, the network was a bundle of capillaries, with some swelling with life while others dried up, all responding to the invisible hand of the climate. The precious jade, the bolts of silk, and the ideas they carried did not simply follow human ambition. They followed the water, tracing paths laid down by ancient weather patterns long before the First Empire ever dreamed of mapping them. A single, shimmering thread can unravel an entire history. The very name Silk Road places this legendary fabric at the center of the story, as if its trade only began with the official caravans of the Han Dynasty. But the archaeological record tells a different, far older tale, one where silk was already whispering its way across continents centuries before any Chinese emperor thought to use it as a tool of statecraft. The evidence is delicate, often just a few fragile strands preserved by chance, but its message is thunderously clear. Take, for instance, a discovery that rewrites the map of ancient Europe. In the late 6th century before the Common Era, a Celtic chieftain was laid to rest in what is now southern Germany, in a burial mound at the site of Hochdorf. His tomb was a spectacular display of local power, filled with gold torques, a bronze couch, and a wagon for his journey to the next world. But among these distinctly Celtic treasures, scientists made a startling find. Preserved within the burial were microscopic remains of silk threads. This was not a local textile. The fibers were identified as Chinese silk, Bomix mori, the product of domesticated silkworms that at that time existed only in China. Here was a material that had traveled over 5,000 miles from the workshops of the Yangtze or Yellow River valleys, through the endless steppe, across the Carpathian Mountains, and finally into the hands of a tribal leader in the heart of Europe. This was not a bulk trade, but the movement of the ultimate luxury, a material so rare and exotic that its very possession spoke of unimaginable connections. The Celtic chieftain likely had no idea of the fabric's precise origin, only that it was a substance of almost magical fineness and prestige, a suitable adornment for a king in death. This single thread proves that the network's reach was truly continental, capable of delivering the most exclusive Chinese marvels to the far western edges of the known world generations before Alexander the Great was even born. This westward flow of silk is mirrored and magnified in the frozen tombs of the East. The Pazyryk kurgans of the Altai Mountains, dating from the 5th to the 3rd centuries before the Common Era, have yielded some of the most spectacular and well-preserved silks from the ancient world. These are not mere threads, but substantial fragments, some even woven into elaborate applique designs that adorned clothing, wall hangings, and ceremonial horse trappings. The silks found at Pazyryk display distinct Chinese weaving techniques and patterns, including some of the earliest known examples of intricate polychrome damask. One famous fragment even depicts a Chinese mythological scene, a seated figure in a stylized carriage. The volume and quality of silk in these steppe burials is significant. This was not a rare novelty trickling in, but a consistent, high-value import that formed a core part of the steppe elite's display of wealth and status. The Scythian chieftains of Pazyryk were curating a pan-Eurasian identity, and Chinese silk was as essential to that identity as their local gold animal art or Persian carpets. They wore the world literally on their sleeves, stitching together their prestige from the finest materials each civilization could offer. The presence of these silks, so far from their origin and in such quantity, indicates a well-established demand and a reliable, if indirect, supply chain. It reveals a pre-existing market, a taste for luxury that the steppe aristocracy cultivated and satisfied through their central role in the network. Long before the Han Dynasty, bureaucrats standardized the bolt lengths and grades for official trade. These fibers were already moving along the relay system, passed from hand to trusted hand, each transaction increasing their value and mystique. What does this mean for our understanding of the Silk Road's origins? It fundamentally shifts the narrative. Silk was not a discovery made by Han envoys and then introduced to a waiting world. It was already a legendary commodity, its secret closely guarded but its product widely coveted, circulating through the ancient world's prestige economy for hundreds of years. The Han Dynasty did not invent the silk trade, it inherited it, and then, with the formidable resources of a unified empire, it industrialized and weaponized it. The state-sponsored caravans of the later Silk Road turned a trickle of luxury into a flood of diplomacy, using silk as a standardized currency for paying soldiers, rewarding allies, and purchasing the heavenly horses they so desperately needed. The earlier organic network operated on a different principle. It dealt in exclusivity, a few precious ounces of silk, arriving after a journey of years and thousands of miles, held a power that tons of later trade cloth never could. It was a symbol of access to the distant, the mysterious, and the divine. The Celtic chieftain in Germany and the Scythian lord in Siberia were participants in the same conversation, a conversation conducted in the silent language of luxury, proving that the desire for connection and the value placed on the rare and beautiful built the road long before empires decided to put up the signposts. But the web of ancient connection was not woven from silk alone. While caravans traced paths across the Asian heartland, other vast networks were humming with activity, moving different treasures across entirely different landscapes. The story of early globalization was not a single road, but a symphony of routes playing in concert. To the south, the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean powered a maritime system just as ancient and sophisticated as any overland trail. For millennia, sailors learned to read the seasonal rhythms of these winds, which blow predictably northeast in the summer and southwest in the winter. This natural clock allowed for planned, long-distance voyages. By at least the 3rd millennium before the Common Era, vessels were plying the waters between the sophisticated civilizations of Mesopotamia, in what is now Iraq, and the Indus Valley, in modern Pakistan and India. Cargoes of Mesopotamian grain, wool, and oil traveled east, while Indus Valley goods like carved stone beads, timber, and cotton textiles traveled west. This was not coastal hopping, but open water sailing across hundreds of miles of sea. The trade likely extended further, touching the shores of the Arabian Peninsula and possibly even the Horn of East Africa, exchanging goods and ideas with cultures there. This maritime network moved bulk commodities that were too heavy or perishable for long land journeys, creating a southern counterpart to the steppe highways. Meanwhile, in the frozen north, another kind of road was active. While we focus on east-west movement, vital north-south corridors stretched deep into the Siberian taiga and tundra. These might be thought of as the fur roads. For the settled and steppe communities to the south, the dense forests of Siberia held a treasure arguably as valuable as silk or jade, warm, luxurious fur. Sable, ermine, fox, and squirrel pelts were in constant demand among elites from China to the Mediterranean, symbols of status and practical protection against the cold. Indigenous hunting communities in Siberia traded these furs southward along river systems like the Yenisei and the Lena, where they entered the larger Eurasian exchange network. This trade brought southern goods like metal tools, textiles, and ornaments into the Arctic Circle, creating a cultural and economic dialogue between vastly different worlds. The presence of Chinese bronze mirrors in Siberian burials or Mediterranean glass beads in the far north testifies to the reach of these vertical routes. So the Silk Road was never an isolated phenomenon. It was one thread in a much grander tapestry. the Eurasian land routes, the Indian Ocean sea lanes, and the Siberian river trails together formed an interconnected web of ancient globalization. Goods, ideas, and people circulated in all directions by sail, by sled, and by hoof. A single sable pelt from the Arctic might eventually grace the shoulders of a Roman noble, while a cowrie shell from the Maldives in the Indian Ocean could become a currency or sacred object in inland China. This broader perspective changes everything. It means the continents were not just connected along one famous line, but through a multidimensional lattice of exchange. The desire to reach beyond the horizon, to trade, to explore, and to share was a fundamental human impulse playing out across the entire ancient world. The story is not about a road opening, but about countless paths, born from geography and human ingenuity, slowly knitting the world together long before history thought to give it a name. Zhang Qian's epic journey now appears in a different light entirely. The evidence is overwhelming, a continent already humming with the movement of jade, silk, chariots, and seeds for centuries before his mission even began. So where does this leave the legendary envoy, long celebrated as the pioneer who opened the Silk Road? It does not diminish his courage or his accomplishments, but it profoundly reframes them. Zhang Qian was not an explorer discovering an empty wilderness. He was a diplomat and a spy, sent to navigate a world that was already densely interconnected, its rules and pathways long established by others. His true, monumental contribution was not in creating the network, but in being the first to systematically observe it, document it, and bring that intelligence back to a major imperial power with the resources to engage with it directly. Think of him not as a trailblazer, but as the first official cartographer, meticulously drawing a map of a continent that everyone else was already using. His 13-year odyssey, filled with capture, hardship, and narrow escapes, was a reconnaissance mission into a pre-existing global system. When he finally returned to the Han court, his reports were not tales of untouched lands, but detailed political and economic briefings. He described the sophisticated urban centers of Bactria, the military strength of the Yuezhi, the quality of Fergana's horses, and the complex web of alliances and rivalries that crisscrossed Central Asia. This was priceless strategic information, for the Han Dynasty, perpetually threatened by the Xiongnu Confederation to the north. This intelligence offered a way out of their geopolitical trap. Zhang Qian revealed that the world beyond their frontier was not a chaotic void of barbarians, but a landscape of potential allies, trade partners, and alternative routes to power. His journey provided the blueprint for a new grand strategy, one that shifted from passive defense to active engagement. The Han response was swift and transformative. They did not simply send more envoys. They launched military campaigns to secure the Hexi corridor. They established fortified commanderies and agricultural colonies to support the travel lanes, and they began dispatching state-sponsored caravans on an unprecedented scale. This was the moment the organic, decentralized whisper of the Steppe network was met with the organized, booming voice of a centralized empire. Zhang Qian's mission was the catalyst that shifted the system from a grassroots economy into a tool of statecraft. Silk was no longer just a luxury good moving in small quantities through relays of trust. It became a standardized imperial currency, used to pay soldiers, reward nomadic allies, and purchase the strategic assets the Han needed. The network matured, its volume increased, and its pathways became more formalized under the protective, and sometimes heavy, hand of imperial interest. So was Zhang Qian a latecomer in the grand, millennia-long story of Eurasian connection? Absolutely. The road was already ancient, but in the specific story of China's relationship with the wider world, he was the essential pivot. He represents the moment when a great civilization stopped looking inward, armed with the knowledge that the world was already at its doorstep, and decided to step through the gate and join the conversation on its own terms. His legacy is not the road itself, but the official entry stamp, the moment the map was finally drawn in imperial ink, changing the course of history forever. This layered history reveals a world far more connected than our textbooks ever suggested. The story of the Silk Road is not one of a single beginning, but of multiple origins, each adding a new thread to a tapestry woven over millennia. To understand how it functioned so long before the Han Dynasty, we must see it not as a single road, but as a series of overlapping systems, each building upon the last. The deepest layer is a prehistoric substrate, a foundation of exchange laid down in the Neolithic era. This was the world of silent stones, where materials like jade and obsidian began their epic journeys. This earliest network was not about empires or even formal trade, but about the fundamental human drive to acquire rare and spiritually potent materials. It operated through direct, long-distance expeditions or slow, village-to-village relay, connecting distant communities through shared values long before they shared a written language. Upon this ancient foundation, a more dynamic and recognizable system emerged during the Bronze and Iron Ages. This was the era of the pastoralist network, the true engine of Eurasian connectivity for over 2,000 years. The nomadic herders of the steppe, with their profound mobility and deep knowledge of the grasslands, became the indispensable middlemen. They did not just move goods, they created the very infrastructure of trust through relay trade, ritualized gift exchange, and shared cultural codes like the animal-style art. They were the integrators, linking the isolated islands of agrarian civilization China, India, Persia into a nascent continental web. This organic, decentralized system was humming with activity, moving chariot technologies, precious metals, and early silks. Then from the west came a new kind of force, the expansive agrarian empires. First, the Achaemenid Persians demonstrated how to administer a continent-spanning route with their royal road and standardized coinage. Then Alexander the Great's conquests and the Hellenistic kingdoms that followed hardwired the western terminus of the network directly into the economic and cultural powerhouse of the Mediterranean world. They introduced mass coinage, created cosmopolitan cities at the crossroads, and generated a powerful, sustained demand for Eastern luxuries. This Western layer added top-down organization, financial sophistication, and a new cultural vocabulary to the existing bottom-up steppe network. So, by the 2nd century before the Common Era, the world Zhang Qian entered was already a complex, mature ecosystem. It had a deep prehistoric root system, a thriving trunk and branches formed by pastoralist mobility, and flourishing limbs shaped by Persian and Greek imperial ambition. The Han Dynasty did not arrive to an empty stage. They arrived late to a play that was already in its 3rd act, with a full cast of characters and established plot lines. Their entry was transformative, not creative. With the immense resources of a unified empire, they formalized, militarized, and scaled up the existing network. They provided the security, the diplomatic framework, and the bureaucratic push to turn a multifaceted whisper into a historic roar. The official Silk Road was born not from discovery, but from engagement, the moment a major agrarian empire from the east finally decided to join and ultimately dominate a conversation that had been quietly unfolding for centuries all around it. This deeper history forces a profound shift in how we see the ancient world. For centuries, a powerful story has been told, one that divides the map into 2 neat categories. On one side, the settled, civilized empires building cities, writing laws, and creating art. On the other, the nomadic barbarian hordes living on the fringes, seen as agents of chaos and destruction, waiting to raid or be pacified by their more advanced neighbors. This story is not just incomplete, it is fundamentally backwards when we look at the evidence. The great civilizations of China, Persia, and the Mediterranean did not develop in splendid isolation, then reluctantly reach out to trade with primitive outsiders. They were, from their very foundations, shaped and enriched by the very people they labeled as barbarians. The pastoralist cultures of the steppe were not the destroyers of civilization. They were its essential engineers, the master builders of the world's first internet, a living web of connection that transmitted the raw materials of progress. Every time a Chinese state acquired a superior breed of horse for its cavalry, every time a Persian king received a report from a distant satrapy, every time a Greek artisan in Bactria drew inspiration for a statue of the Buddha, they were participating in a system built and maintained by nomadic hands. The flow was not one way from the civilized core to a passive periphery. It was a constant, dynamic dialogue. The chariot technology that transformed Shang warfare, the artistic motifs that adorned Zhou bronzes, the very crops that diversified Chinese agriculture, these were not Chinese inventions suddenly gifted to the world. They were innovations that traveled, often for centuries, along the steppe relay, filtered through the sensibilities of countless intermediaries before being adopted and adapted within the walls of settled empires. The steppe was not a barrier, it was the ultimate connector, a cultural and technological superhighway where ideas were traded as freely as goods. To call the architects of this system barbarians is to fundamentally misunderstand the nature of ancient progress. True civilization is not defined solely by city walls and written records. It is also defined by the ability to connect, to facilitate exchange, and to build networks of trust across vast and unforgiving distances. In this, the pastoralists were the most advanced civilization of their age. Their legacy is not written on clay tablets or stone stelae. It is written in the DNA of our modern world, in the interconnectedness we now take for granted. They taught a fractured planet how to speak to itself. When we finally let go of the old civilized versus barbarian dichotomy, the entire map of Eurasian history comes into a clearer, more honest focus. We see not isolated stars of achievement, but a brilliant constellation, each culture shining in part because of the light it borrowed from its neighbors, carried across the darkness by those we once refused to see. So the map we thought we knew must be redrawn. The evidence from Jade, chariots, frozen silks, and wandering seeds compels a single, profound conclusion. The essential functions we attribute to the Silk Road, the long-distance trade in both luxury and staple goods, the transmission of complex technologies, the quiet spread of artistic styles and spiritual ideas, were not born in the 2nd century before the Common Era. They were already thriving, operating on a trans-Eurasian scale for well over 1,000 years before the Han Dynasty dispatched its first official envoy. This was not a single road, but a living, breathing network, an ancient internet whose servers were the nomadic encampments on the steppe, whose cables were the river valleys and mountain passes, and whose users were everyone from Celtic chieftains to Shang kings. What changed with Zhang Qian's mission was not the existence of the network, but its recognition. The Han Dynasty did not build the system, they joined it, and with the formidable power of a centralized state, they amplified its signal for the history books to finally hear. This revelation teaches us something fundamental about history itself. The story of humanity is often far deeper, far more intricate than the written record alone suggests. For centuries, the only voices we could hear were those of the scribes in settled empires, documenting their own triumphs and perspectives. The vibrant, dynamic world of the steppe, the oasis towns, and the maritime routes operated in a different register, one recorded not on silk or bamboo, but in the soil, in strands of fiber, and in the chemical signatures of plants. Archaeology grants us the ability to listen to those silent voices, to read the diary of the planet written in artifacts and isotopes. Each new discovery, from a strand of silk in a German tomb to a wheat seed in a Central Asian hearth, adds another line to that diary, revealing an ancient world that was astonishingly interconnected. It was a world where a community's identity could be woven from threads sourced from every corner of the continent, where a single meal could contain ingredients from ecosystems thousands of miles apart, and where a spiritual symbol could journey from a Persian temple to a Central Asian cliff face, carried on nothing more than faith and foot traffic. This perspective invites us to look at other historical beginnings with a more curious and critical eye. How many other pivotal moments, credited to a single empire or a famous individual, are actually just the moment a light was shone on a process already centuries in the making? The next time you encounter a story of a great discovery or a sudden connection, pause and ask what whispers might have been there all along, waiting just beneath the surface of the official record for us to learn how to listen.